Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar which has been hosted by the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons. We've been holding a series of webinars to address the impact of COVID on surgical education and training. So on behalf of the College of Surgeons, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all meeting from around Australia. I'm on Kaurna land in Adelaide. I would also like to pay my respects to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging. And for our New Zealand viewers and the panelists, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everyone. As I said, we've been running a series of these webinars. This webinar is focused on addressing issues around the pre-vocational space. And the impact that COVID has had on that. We have with us a number of panelists, as you can see in front of you. I'd like to introduce them. Jenny Chambers. Jenny is a vascular surgeon based in Port Macquarie in New South Wales. Jenny is a college counsellor, and Jenny chairs the Pre-Vocational and Skills Education Committee. And that's the committee that oversees the JDOCS resources and educational program. It also oversees the skills courses such as EMST, CRISP and ASSET, the sort of courses that a number of presets would be accessing. So welcome, Jenny.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Excellent. Now, our next panelist is Richard Wangshay. Richard is a plastic and reconstructive surgeon. Richard is based in Auckland, New Zealand, and Richard knows everything about exams, and he's been on the exams committee for quite a while, and in fact Richard chairs the exams committee. And for those who don't know, the exams committee is responsible for the general surgical science exam, the clinical exam and a range of other specialty specific exams, pretty much all the exams that the college holds other than the fellowship exam. So welcome Richard, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say tonight. Our next panelist is Karen Fielding. Karen is an orthopaedic surgeon based in Wagga Wagga in New South Wales. Karen is a college counsellor. Karen is also chair of the specialist IMG committee, which oversees the pathway of IMGs on a pathway to fellowship. Karen also has a huge amount of experience and involvement with the New South Wales HETI, which is the Health Education and Training Institute. And that institute delivers and supports education for pre-vocational doctors. So we're certainly looking forward to tapping into your expertise in that area, Karen. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Welcome,
and
everybody.
Certainly not least is my colleague up in Darwin. And welcome, Phil Carson. Phil is a general surgeon based in Darwin. Phil is a senior counsellor within the college, and Phil is currently the censor-in-chief. And it's a very unusual term, and I'm trying to grapple with what it actually means. But essentially what it means is that Phil is responsible for the oversight of everything that relates to education and training in the college. So Phil will bring a very broad helicopter perspective to the discussion tonight. So thank you all the panelists for your involvement tonight. And I should mention that in the background, we have a number of other people, college staff. We have Mark Prestopino. Mark is the manager of the exams department with the college, and Mark will be moderating the online questions tonight. Also in the background, we have Grace Chan, who is the Academy Program Coordinator from the Professional Development Department of the college, and also Emma Shields, and Emma is also Program Coordinator from the Professional Development Department. And both Emma and Grace will be helping with ensuring that all the IT runs smoothly and ensuring that you are all able to submit your questions. So as I said at the very top, this webinar is really aimed at addressing the questions and concerns and issues around the impact of COVID on the pre-vocational space. Thank you for a number of you for submitting a plethora of questions. From those questions, we were able to identify 3 key themes to be addressed tonight. The first theme is around the conduct of the General Surgical Sciences exam, and that's probably not surprising to hear that that's probably our key theme for tonight. The other theme relates to meeting selection eligibility for the SET programs, and the third theme is around the forthcoming SET selections. So if you do have questions, please type them in the question pane. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted onto the College COVID Hub within the next 48 hours. And before we kick off with addressing some of these issues, I would like to acknowledge on behalf of the college that the COVID has created significant disruption for every one of you, both personally and professionally. And I think we empathise that you are in a particularly vulnerable position. You are at the start of your careers, you're junior doctors, you are yet to get into surgical training, and a lot of your plans and aspirations have been significantly undermined by the pandemic. So we don't underestimate how much of an impact this has had on all of you. With that in mind, we as a college have been working very hard to try to ensure that we continue to support education and training in your learning within the clinical space and within the constraints of the restrictions imposed by the COVID. Hopefully tonight we will be able to give you some information so that you can see that there are ways for you to progress in your career. I'd like to start off with the first question to Richard. This is clearly going to be around the General Surgical Science exam. Richard, can you start off by telling our viewers what arrangements have been confirmed for holding the GSSE in November of this year across both Australia and New Zealand?
Right, so thanks Adrian, and good evening everyone. Welcome from level 3 lockdown in Auckland. I should be wearing a mask, but we're probably safe on webcam. For those of you who are sitting, the dates are November 4 and 5. The applications have already closed. I understand there's still people trying to apply, but those exams are now currently locked. The venues at the moment include the traditional Clifton's venues, and they are moving from west to east: Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Wellington, and Auckland. And those are large centres which are geared up for computerised exams, and they were chosen after a lot of care by the College of Surgeons, so that they met certain minimum standards to ensure that our computer run exams run as smoothly as they can. There is work currently underway to try and find alternate venues to minimise not only interstate travel but also intrastate travel. The College of Surgeons has noted that as this pandemic continues to evolve, that restriction on travel, be it from a federal level or from a state level, or even now from a jurisdictional level, so in other words, your employer may not allow you to go, that we will try and make it easier for you to actually sit the exam closer to home. There have been questions about, look, could we possibly do this at home? And the answer to that really is about ensuring there are minimum standards that we need to meet. And so things that people aren't interested in, but which are really important, is ensuring that all candidates see the exam the same way. So there are minimum standards for the type of computer, the monitor. Obviously you need, at Clifton's, not only do you have an internet connection, but you have a redundant internet connection. We've all been on teleconferences now where someone stutters or you know, their internet connection cuts out. We can't have that happen to you halfway through an exam. The exam is stressful enough. And so the venues that we choose actually have redundant, fast internet connections. They also have spare computers. And if there's an issue, you can actually stop. If your computer freezes, you move to another one and it picks up exactly where you left off. And that's why the importance of an internet connection is so important, because not only is the exam streamed, but it's monitored as well. So we can recreate whatever you're doing in another computer. At the moment, there are 647 candidates who have lined up to sit the GSSE, and we know where everyone is, and we're preparing for that number. But as I said before, we're also preparing to be able to host these exams so that we minimize the amount of travel. But there are minimum standards that need to be reached before we're happy to host an exam there, so that the people who go there aren't disadvantaged compared to other people.
Thank you, Richard. I guess you alluded to the fact that the college is recognising there are many candidates who are unlikely to be in any of those places where you've mentioned we have exam sittings. And you mentioned that the college is exploring options there. To what extent do you feel confident that we'll be able to identify places in, for example, Tasmania or even Northern Territory, and even in regional New South Wales, regional Victoria, regional Queensland?
Up till about 5 minutes, well, up to about half an hour ago, that was work that was still going, and we've actually received some positive feedback now that actually we can secure some of these areas. And the issue really is we're not the only college or the only organization trying to seek these good places. So in an ideal world, we would get people to meet because there's economies of scale. It ensures that everyone gets the same exam experience with quality invigilators and all that sort of thing. But we appreciate that the pandemic's evolving. We need to make sure that wherever we host it, that the candidates can be assured that they're getting they're not disadvantaged for sitting somewhere else. So we actually have got places. We're in the process of securing them. We're also making sure that they're up to standard.
Okay?
Yeah.
No, and I think, to be clear for our listeners, in one of our previous webinars, there were suggestions that we should be looking at rural clinical schools or universities because they also hold exams. But you've articulated that, in fact, there is a minimum standard, and that standard is quite a high standard in terms of our specifications and requirements, redundant computers, high-speed internet, security, invigilation, etc., and also capacity to hold the number of candidates that we're looking at. Okay, so Richard, in terms of what's happening in Victoria and in Melbourne, and yes, I know you're in Auckland, but I'm sure you get to hear the news about what's happening across the ditch. What are the plans for conducting GSSE in Victoria and specifically in Melbourne?
Right, so as of right now, we've received dispensation to allow the Clifton's exam venue to open and for candidates to actually travel there for the fellowship exam. Now, the GSSE is going to be held in November. There's a lot of water to pass under the bridge then. And so at the moment, we know that we can run right now in the Cliftons in central Melbourne, but we want to minimize the risk of something being cancelled. And so we're looking aggressively and proactively at other venues throughout the state of Victoria to minimize the risk, because I understand that there are jurisdictions now who are limiting the ability for junior doctors to actually travel into central Melbourne. So the exams team is working hard to try and find alternate venues so that we can work around those limitations, because I hope I'm wrong, but I suspect that these limitations are going to continue, that this pandemic isn't going to loosen up anytime soon.
So it sounds like we're doing as much as we can to provide access to the GCSE, but really will eventually depend on a local situation and what happens in November within Victoria and in Melbourne. Okay. Jenny Chambers, can I ask you a common question that came up? What advice can you give candidates who feel that their preparation for the GCSE has been significantly disrupted, maybe to the extent that they're not entirely confident that they are as well prepared as they would have liked to be?
I think that we as a college are very aware that everyone has been disadvantaged to some degree, but others may be more, for example, those in Melbourne. And I think that it really is up to the individual as to how they best prepare. For those that want to present anyway, and it's very important that they don't come unwell, and we need to make sure that anyone who could possibly be COVID, have had a contact or have any possibility of having COVID or being unwell doesn't come. And so for anyone who decides that they cannot sit the exam, even with a fairly short notice, if it's COVID related, then we will be compassionate and refund the fees. So we'll not be out of pocket. We can't really have everybody on the day not deciding that they're up for it, because we do have costs that we as a college have to pay for venues, etc. But I think we have to expect you to prepare as best you can. And if you feel, however, coming right up to it that you're not, that you're disadvantaged, then we will, on a case-by-case basis, take that into consideration. So if you present and don't feel, and you feel that there are real reasons for you not being at your best, we can't lower standards, we can't change pass rates, etc. We can't change marks, but we can take into the situation an individual case.
Right. Yeah, and so you also mentioned that some consideration and compassion will be exercised by the college. The college also has special consideration provisions for assessments and particularly for examinations. Are you able to outline what those special considerations might be, particularly as it relates to this coming sitting of the GCSE and how it relates to COVID?
Well, really, from a COVID point of view, any problem that has a COVID relation, you mean for withdrawing or?
Well, say after sitting the exam, and maybe Richard, you're very familiar with the special considerations. Are you also able to add to that?
Sure, sorry. So, within 24 hours, you should put in your application for special consideration. Every application for special consideration is de-identified, and you send in your evidence, and then it's weighed up by the SSENC committee. Now, the thing about the GCSE, and it was an answer I was going to give later, but I can give it now. In order for a special consideration to work, in other words, you only do this because you want to pass, right? You still have to pass. You still have to meet the minimum standard for every component. You can't have a component failure, and you have to be within one error width of the pass mark. And in fact, it sounds really tough, but actually, if you achieve that twice, if you have no component fails and come within one error width of the pass mark twice, we will elevate you to a pass anyway. Okay.
Right.
But episode of special consideration is reviewed, and if you feel that you've been adversely affected for whatever reason, write it down and it will be reviewed by the committee. I will say that the committee does not always agree that the reason for the special consideration is sufficient to warrant an elevation. But actually, even if you have something that we absolutely agree is a reason for special consideration, if you don't hit those performance marks, we can't actually elevate you to a pass anyway.
So, yes, Phil?
Yeah, so just to make that clear, I guess, Richard, you can't, special consideration is something that was unforeseen happening right on the exam period. So it's no good, we won't, I guess, saying interruption in preparation for the exam, it won't be a grounds for special consideration. In that, we ask you to consider carefully whether you're ready to sit the exam, and there's that ability to pull out with no penalty, and particularly if it's if it's COVID related in this case. But it's no good if you're not prepared to sit exam or you're unwell on the day. That won't be grounds for special consideration.
Yeah. So it's probably an important point to just emphasise that special consideration, to get a favourable decision from a special consideration, you need a valid reason. And as Phil has said, it needs to relate to something that occurred at the time. And the second part, as Richard has said, you must meet minimum performance requirements. If you didn't perform very well at all, then your special consideration is less likely to be favourably adjudicated. Richard, I might go back to you. There's a question that has come online. You've mentioned about conducting the exam in Melbourne and Melbourne, Victoria. What sort of backup contingency plans are there for conducting the exam in Auckland in the event of a repeat lockdown or escalation of the lockdown?
Well, I sort of wrote out a reply to that. I'm not sure if it actually got sent through. So what we're trying to do is, at the moment in New Zealand, there are 2 venues, so Auckland and Wellington. We're trying to secure another one in Christchurch to minimise travel. At the moment, social distancing isn't an issue in these exam venues, simply because we need you to distance for exam purposes anyway. We haven't crossed that bridge yet, but typically the district health boards in New Zealand grant exceptions to travel for educational purposes. So certainly for sitting an exam, it's certainly something that we would expect dispensation from hospitals and from the government to allow you to sit. Having said that, there's a lot of water to go under the bridge, and what was once acceptable during a previous lockdown in New Zealand is now no longer acceptable. So we're going to do everything that we can to get these exams to run. We will do everything that we can to keep people safe. And so the exam experience that the people will experience this time around will be subtly different from what they had before. There will be definitely hand washing going on. There will be professionalism for displayed to your other colleagues when you tell, so that you stay, you don't come to the exam sick. And I've got to say, in New Zealand, we will have QR codes so you can scan in, so we can contact trace you. The other thing too is, and it's a contentious one, but it's becoming less contentious, is wearing a face mask. Right? So we've watched international opinions about whether or not you should wearing a face mask slowly drift towards more and more having it. And I suspect by the time we sit in November, that actually candidates will be expected to wear face masks. Can't guarantee that. And it will depend on what the local conditions are. But certainly in Auckland, it's certainly, with the numbers that we're talking about, we can get dispensation to get people at this stage together. But what we're trying to do is to minimise the risk of people having to come to Auckland, because at the moment we're the centre of lockdown. So we have another venue in Wellington, but we're looking at another venue in Christchurch to build up that extra capacity there.
Thank you, Richard. Jenny, just back to you, more relating to candidates who have to withdraw, whether because they feel underprepared or because of a COVID-related issue. Will there be any catch-up sittings? Because apart from November, there's no other sitting planned until February of next year, mid-February. Will there be a catch-up, ability to catch up? And
I think my understanding is that the capacity for February is extremely large. The capacity for the GSSE really is much more than we normally have. So as long as sitting in February enables you to be able to apply for SET and for selection, then you will be able to sit in February. So at this stage, I believe there's no extra sittings planned. So if you don't sit in November, then you will definitely be able to sit in February, and we expect, we can't guarantee at this stage, but we expect that that should be adequate for selection for the 2022.
Yep. And that's something I think the training boards are becoming aware of, and so we'll need to consider that in terms of eligibility requirements. I can confirm that the training boards are not exempting people from sitting the GSSE to be eligible to enter SET, but they have exempted sitting the clinical exam. It doesn't mean a candidate who gets into SET won't be needing to sit the clinical exam. It just means that they will be permitted to sit the exam during SET. Phil Carson, I might move to you. And people have already mentioned this a few times, but let's just get some clarification. What if a candidate needs to quarantine or actually is unwell at the time of the GSSE? So what's actually expected of them?
So right at the beginning of this COVID, we sat down and made some principles about how we were going to conduct surgical education during this time. And certainly one of the big principles, both we as a college and you as we all as doctors looking after the public, I guess, is the public good comes first, and then, you know, our looking after all of you and other stakeholders in the college is important too. But just looking at that we can't have any college exams or, you know, educational activity, I guess, being a threat to the public. So it will be very clear and very difficult for everybody, but if you're unwell, if you are quarantined or have symptoms at the time, that you clearly can't congregate, both by law and or edict in most places, but certainly we as a college wouldn't want that either. And I think you will appreciate we as doctors and professionals wouldn't want that either. And it will be very difficult, but we ask you to be totally honest in that. And if you are quarantining or being asked to quarantine because of a contact or indeed have symptoms, it will be very important you withdraw from the exam at that time. Which, like I said, we just feel for you terribly, but that is the world we live in at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. So I might move back to you, Richard. And I guess to some extent you've alluded to this, but can you just outline some of the key differences that will be occurring in the November sitting? You know, it's obviously not a normal sitting. But what will be the key differences?
Okay. Look, I think the key differences all revolve around health and safety. So, you know, in addition to all of the, and it's still being worked through how we maintain and keep people safe and to prevent the spread of COVID, you know, potential spread between people. I guess one of the other potential differences is that some people may be going to a venue outside of our norm, you know, depending on what the need is, depending on what we do. But if you go to one of these other venues, we will move heaven and earth to make sure that you get the same exam experience, that you're not in any way disadvantaged for not being able to get to a main center. The other thing I think people were asking about is, look, would we change the standard? That was one of the questions of that. And actually, the answer is no. the exam the standard is maintained, and it does that. You know, that the normal things that work will continue to work to maintain the standard. So when you pass this GSSE, you can hold your head up high because you have reached the same standard as everyone else who's passed this exam previously, and you don't have to say, oh, I was in that class, or you know, I was the COVID group. Okay, the exam will be worth the same. The other thing about this exam, which is I suppose will be different, is in the past we've been able to give people results within about 3 weeks of sitting. Now, the College of Surgeons gets you to do the 5 P's of surgery: proper planning and practice prevents poor performance. That's more than 5 P's, but we run a few together. But we have done the same thing for your exam. So when after you've sat your exam, it gets marked electronically. The questions that don't perform well are hand reviewed by the people who wrote the exam. If there's been an error, then that question can either be rekeyed or deleted. The results are sent back and reanalyzed, and the exam scaled. After that point, you know, we hear appeals, so we check all the appeals and then we ratify the results. Now that's normally done over 3 days face-to-face in Melbourne, and in July, when the June exam was cancelled, I forced everyone to do the entire meeting that we would have to do those 3 components remotely. So we know that we can do this remotely. And I've been talking to the exams department, and they will have dispensation to set up the exam in the college headquarters, but they could also do it from home. They're at work from home at the moment, and they've given me an undertaking. So short of the zombie apocalypse, we should be able to get this up and running. But the differences for people is that actually the results will come about a week later. So it'll be about a month rather than 3 weeks. And that's because as everyone who's had to do teleconferences will tell you, there's only a limited time span that your brain works compared to when you're actually in person. And the second thing is that we have subject matter experts who create this exam and go through things everywhere from Perth through to New Zealand. That's a 4-hour time zone span that we have to do. And so we've discovered that we need to, our effective working day is shortened. And so instead of meeting face-to-face over 3 days, we're going to run, after trialing it, we're going to have to take a week to get these results. So again, the exam that you sit will be the same exam that everyone else has sat. The standard to which you will need to achieve will be the same as everyone else. The experience that you get should be the same no matter where you sit the exam, and that's what we're working heaven and earth to do. The differences are health and safety. And the process that we go through to make sure that each question is accurate, that appeals are heard properly, and the results are ratified will take a little bit longer, and therefore the results will come out later. But the result that you get will be the same no matter when you sat it. So there will be no special badge to say you got a COVID 2020 discount special. You have a full GSSE.
Yep. Well, thank you, Richard, and that's a fairly comprehensive summary of what the differences will be, which I took it as 3 areas: COVID safe practices, the experience only for those who may not be sitting in a traditional Clifton venue, and of course the ratification process will be a bit more extended. There is a question online, and it relates to cancellation of the GSSE, and I guess another way of paraphrasing the question, looks like this is to you, Richard, is under what conditions would the GSSE be cancelled?
So we are moving heaven and earth to make sure it's not cancelled. The only reason it will be cancelled is at government level, you can't congregate or get together. And you know, at the moment, we're all health professionals, we all go to work. We're considered essential workers. And certainly at this phase, things which are considered essential, such as going to work, these exams have so far fallen under that category. Now, having said that, politicians can change their minds. So as far as we can make it, we will make it work. Now, I guess the other thing though is that should, say, one centre not be able to run, we will allow other centres to run. Okay, and I think that, you know, if you hear in news that New Zealand has gone down in flames, you should still go to your testing centre in Australia and sit your exam. Feel for us, but make sure that you keep going.
Thank you, Richard. Okay. Seems at the moment we've exhausted some of the questions around the GSSE, so we might move on to the next theme. And the next theme is really about meeting eligibility requirements for the set training programs across all the different specialties. And clearly this is a valid question because a number of junior doctors have experienced that their clinical rotations have been disrupted. Either they've been taken off their rotation or run, or it's been disrupted to the extent that they have not had the clinical experience that they were expecting. Clearly, face-to-face courses and conferences have been suspended, and lots of junior doctors have not been able to access that. They haven't been able to access the opportunities to present at meetings, etc. Certainly not face-to-face. So that's the background to that particular theme. Karen Fielding, can I ask you, will eligibility requirements for SET be altered in any way in the next year?
Thank you, Adrian. So the eligibility requirements will not be changed, but the STBs will be accepting some alternatives to some of the normal requirements, such as virtual presentations rather than face-to-face. If you've been able to access a virtual presentation, that will be equally acceptable. Online courses, for example, would be acceptable. Some unusual situations might occur where you had, for example, an ICU term that you were meant to do to get your terms up ready for your application that you haven't been able to access. Then it's important that you get in touch with the appropriate specialty training board that you are applying for and have a talk to them about that, because the specialty training boards have all said that you will not be disadvantaged because of COVID. So it's really important that you have a talk to the managers and speak to them about that if you have a term that's booked for later in the year that you can make up. So there are alternatives to what we would have normally required for set selection that will be accepted. The clinical exam obviously hasn't been running, so the specialty training boards have said that that is not a requirement. And there are some face-to-face courses that you haven't been able to access, such as EMST, ASSET, and CRISP. And so for those courses that you have to do as a prerequisite for your applications, then the specialty training boards have said that some of those requirements can be accessed during your training once you get onto SET. So I think all the specialty training boards have been making a very big effort to try and accommodate the problems that you have faced during this COVID period.
Thank you, Karen. Can you explain why training boards are prepared to give exemptions and have flexibility around courses and presentations, but not so much around the clinical rotations? So they said that they won't change the requirements around clinical rotations?
Well, those clinical rotations are very important for your overall knowledge and understanding and learning as a junior doctor. But as I said, if you have been significantly affected and you haven't been able to get one of the required terms, and you can get it in the time in this year prior to starting SET, then they will have a look at that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I think my understanding is that the clinical experience that you're getting in your preset years are essential for making or allowing a candidate to be ready for training, for set training. So that's very hard to compromise or find an alternative experience which is not clinically based. So that's the key reason for that. Having said that, the training boards are also understanding that if, for example, they require a candidate to have a critical care term and they haven't been able to access a critical care term, whether it's ICU or CCU or one of the other eligible terms, they are asking applicants to flag that with the individual training boards, and the training boards will look at that and see whether they can be flexible around that. So, I mean, and I know you said that one of the key principles that the college is trying to ensure is that that no one's going to be disadvantaged, but I mean, I think in actual fact people are being disadvantaged, and I think what the college is trying to do is to minimize the adverse impact on that. A number of training boards I'm aware have said that they will look at even adjusting scores, because what they're realizing is that a number of people have already met the eligibility requirements and in the pre-COVID era. And if they now change the goalposts and say, no, you don't need to meet those, then those people are potentially disadvantaged. And yet, if we don't change the goalposts, then those in the post-COVID era who haven't met those requirements are also at a disadvantage. So one way that training boards may try to manage that is to adjust the scores and weightings for some of these eligibility requirements. When will candidates know specifically for their preferred specialty, when will they know what the selection criteria will be for 2021 round of selection?
So the selection criteria is always looked at after the selection for this year, which is happening in September.
Yes.
So, sorry.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it's later this year. Yeah.
So it's a bit later this year. So after the September selection happens this year, then the selection criteria will be reviewed, and that will be presented to the college at the next BSET meeting. But they have stated that there will be no big surprises, that, you know, the selection criteria should be very similar to this year.
Yeah. Okay, so it's going to be a little bit later than normal in terms of publishing those selection regulations.
November, I would say November.
Yeah, I'm also aware that general surgery, for example, was planning to introduce a new curriculum in 2021, but they have decided that they will put that on hold, and if possible, they would be introducing that in 2022.
That's correct, yes. That's the competency-based program. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I have a question, well, it's been directed to me, but I might ask it of the panelists. Some trainees are concerned regarding chatter that a pass in the clinical exam across all surgical subspecialty programs may become a requirement prior to entry onto set training, as is the case for the GSSE. So are we able to discuss whether this may become the case? So what I can say is that there are already a number of training programs, as we've alluded to, who already require the clinical exam as an eligibility requirement. But certainly in the current era, those training programs have said they would defer that requirement. So you don't have to have it as an eligibility. You will, if you are successful in getting into training, then it will be something that you will have to sit when it becomes available. However, there are also a number of other training boards who are considering making the clinical exam a prerequisite, and there is some evidence, education evidence, that supports the movement of the clinical exam into the pre-vocational space. There's also evidence to say that it's a good predictor of performance within surgical education and training. So those training boards are considering that, and they have made a very clear signal that because of what's happening with COVID, that decision will not be made at this stage. That is, they will not make it a prerequisite. At some stage into the future, it may well become a prerequisite, but if and when that happens, the college will follow the due process. People will have sufficient notification of that. They will not be caught off guard with that. Does anybody else want to add to that response?
So I think you've framed it very well, Adrian. So I guess what you're saying is there's a general move to making it in the pre-clinical, in the pre-selection as a selection criteria, and the boards are in different stages of that. But at the moment, that won't be a block for this particular COVID period.
No. Jenny Chambers, can I ask you, and Karen mentioned about courses, etc. Given that there may be exemptions or deferrals to completing courses, when will college courses recommence, and particularly the face-to-face ones?
The face-to-face courses are recommencing the first weekend of September, the 4th to the 6th of September. And at this stage, the college have 28 of the skills courses booked between then and the end of the year. And that's including EMST, ASSET, CRISP, and TIPS. The EMST, obviously, and ASSET are ones that you would be particularly interested in. These 28 skills courses are already all fully subscribed, and they are, at the moment, have got 3 additional ones pending for the year, and that will depend on faculty and venues availability. There may be trainees who require these before they can progress, so they would have some preferential booking into those. The enrolments for the next year's courses, and there are plenty, starting right through January, February, March, and the enrolments for those will open in October. So those that have missed out on a course place this year because of cancellation of courses will be prioritised for the January, February and March courses. So October.
Okay, and one can assume that these courses will be run in a COVID-safe manner. Is that correct?
Yes, there's very strict guidelines. It does differ from state to state, but certainly our college staff have produced an amazing document about approaching and they certainly have looked at the risks of that. So it's all been very well documented what the expectations are, but of course it is different from state to state.
Yeah, and I guess the college will be monitoring the implementation of those processes to make sure that they're both effective and to ensure that if there's any modifications required, then that needs to be made. It does beg the question, well, I guess two aspects. One, will those COVID-safe practices impact on the standard of the learning that can be expected on these courses? I guess that's the first question.
I think it is more in the, as you say, the hand washing and the food, how food's going to be delivered. It's not going to be the usual buffet style, but I think, well, certainly talking to David King with EMST, the experience will be pretty well the same. Karen's going to talk about that. Yeah.
Yes,
we've got an EMST course in Wagga next weekend, and I honestly don't think it's going to change the educational experience. We've just reduced the numbers in each room, and but the content's the same and the delivery is the same. We're just doing more distancing, and as Jenny said, the food prep's different. So look, I really think you need to be really confident that it'll be the same.
Yeah, and I guess the other question that arises from that that issue, or around that issue, is that we're now well aware that there's a plethora of online educational resources that have been developed by lots of different people around the world. So is the college looking at converting some of these skills courses into online modules? Is that possible, or is that desirable?
The CLEAR course is one that I think is pretty well ready to go as an online course. They've certainly been looking at how to deliver more of the courses online, but I think hybrids may be possible. It's certainly an area they're looking to, and whether it's going to be the new normal or not, or whether it's to be something that we accept now and then go back to face-to-face fully in the future, are things that we're working on.
Yeah.
But I think there is a resistance when we talk about the educational experience of face-to-face. So there is a resistance to completely go online.
Yes, Karen?
Can I just give them a tip, because I know that a lot of them are very worried about the fact that they've missed out on a lot of their hands-on anatomy teaching for the exam. And if they're a JDoc, they can access Ackland, and Ackland is a very good tool for their anatomy. Certainly, I know a lot of my trainees have been very worried about their inability to access the anatomy.
Yeah,
so
and I think it. Yeah, and thanks, Karen, because I think it also emphasises that the skills courses that the college runs are skills courses because they are trying to impart behavioural skills and behavioural strategies and psychomotor skills. So those are best acquired in an interactive face-to-face environment as opposed to an online. So there's probably going to be a limit to the number of online courses, or the limit to the courses that can be converted to an online module or component of that. Now we should spend the last few moments talking about set selection. Set selections are in the pipeline. They have been scheduled to start in early, and I'm talking about the interviews. The selection process has already started, but the interviews are commencing fairly soon in the next few weeks. So Phil Carson, what contingencies do training boards have for the forthcoming selection interviews? And that's with an understanding that each training board has slightly different content and slightly different format, and also understanding that Cardiothoracics has already decided quite a while ago that they won't be running selection. But for the other training boards, what contingencies do they have?
Certainly, in general, all the training boards consider the interview phase, all often subtly different, but the interview phase of selection very important. And certainly, educational theory and research has been shown that it is one of the most sensitive things to select from amongst you all who is going to function best as a surgeon. So it is very important. So there's no question of not having an interview phase. And I can assure you that all except one board at least have put in a plan B and plan C, in fact, for varying scenarios of lack of travel from you to a venue, or for the interviewers getting to a venue. And so there will be a degree of video presence, either you as a candidate or the interviewers, if they can't do face-to-face. Face-to-face is still preferable for most of the boards. A few of them, I think Vascular and ENT in Australia, have planned to go totally to electronic delivery, and that makes it a very robust system, but the others have all put a preference for face-to-face, but all have put in various plans. If you can't travel but otherwise well, for instance, you are under quarantine or so forth, there will be ability in most boards to still be interviewed. And the same if you can't, if travel restrictions don't allow you to attend an interview. So there's been a lot of work, as you can imagine, going in by all the training boards into this. With all things in this era, it's going to be very much a partnership between the college and you. And so we do ask for your indulgence and your, I guess, understanding of that we're trying to do our very best to give you, a normal chance of getting into surgery, but things will be more fluid and more, I guess, more fluid is the thing, I guess, right up to just before the interview. There may be changes in either venue or mode of delivery, and that is for your sake to actually give you the best chance of getting this done. So it will be, well, we just ask you to be resilient, and wish you undoubtedly all have been during this time when things have been so disrupted. But that will be part of this whole process too. And in fact, I guess going on in surgical education and life as a junior doctor and trainee generally, this is going to be with us for some time. Things are not going to be totally predictable, and there's going to be need to be a lot of goodwill to get you all going to where you want to be and where the community needs you.
Yeah. Karen Fielding.
I just had a message today from the AOA that due to the numbers of interviewers, that we were probably going to have one interviewer face-to-face and one on the computer. So
yeah, virtual.
That's right.
I mean, I guess I echo Phil's comments that we as a college are, whilst we're very mindful that this is stressful for everybody, we are also asking you as candidates coming up for your selection to be understanding that plans may change at the last minute, that you may be asked to convert from a face-to-face to a Zoom. My understanding and the reassurance I've had from the training boards is that they have been putting as much effort into developing contingencies as they are with their preferred plan, and that they have been communicating this as much as possible to each of their candidates, because they already know who have applied to their program. And obviously there needs to be some balance in the amount of information they can give and the degree of certainty. And I know we all like certainty, but that's certainly not the reality. We all have to live and cope with a degree of doubt and uncertainty. Yes, Karen.
Also, there was a message today that if anybody did have to be in quarantine or was in lockdown and unable to attend an interview, that they could contact the relevant training board and have a virtual interview.
Yes, and I think that is one ability that the training boards have. If that you cannot interview on the day related to a COVID event or issue, then the training boards do have the capacity to try to schedule you in at some later time and by an alternative method if it's not face-to-face. And I'm just looking for any other questions. There's one question to Jenny Chambers. I have an EMST booked in Melbourne for December, and I'm from Canberra. My question is, if the travel restrictions are not lifted by then, what are my options? And ideally, I just don't want a refund. I'm not quite sure what else they're looking for.
Yeah. Well, I think that if that's the case, I mean, one can apply for an exemption for the travel, but I think it's unlikely to be granted for a course. Might be different for an exam, but probably not for a course. And I think we'd have to look at just moving you to another EMST course, perhaps one in Sydney.
Wagga. Across the border to Wagga.
They can come to Wagga in February, because we're going to have another course in February for rural and regional New South Wales in Wagga. So
okay.
That's a good option.
Yeah.
But I guess that there's two parts to that question. The first part is that if they can't attend that course, they'll have to withdraw, and I'm assuming that the college will then provide a refund. And the second part is really about accessing a subsequent course. And certainly, as Karen has said, we will be publishing on the college website all the available courses, dates and locations, so that people can start looking at the alternatives.
Yeah,
And people
so next year's from October.
Yeah, and people that have been disadvantaged like that will get priority from the EMST office.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. Yeah. Look, everyone, we've come to the end of our hour. That was certainly a very informative hour for me anyway. I hope it was for all of you who are listening and observing and watching. Thank you also for the questions that have come through. There's one very late question. What evidence does the candidate need to provide a COVID-related reason? That's a very good question. I guess a description of exactly what a person has experienced and how they think it relates to the COVID situation would suffice. And then if the college requires further clarification, the college will then request that. But thank you, everyone. As I said before, the session has been recorded and will be up on the college website in the next 48 hours. So for those of you who have colleagues who were intending to attend but were not able to be here tonight, then you can please direct them to that website. Also like to thank our panelists tonight for giving up their time and providing us with this update. Also to Mark, Grace and Emma in the background for keeping the questions flowing and also for keeping us online. That I thought was a very smooth session. And also to all of you out there, please keep yourselves informed. Please stay safe. Please look after each other. And please also be on the lookout for more of these webinars as the situation changes and as we see that there's a need for running these seminars, we will continue to do so. So everyone stay safe and my best wishes to all of you.
Bye-bye. All the best.